Hello, welcome to week 13 online tutorial and lecture, cross-cultural management, negotiation. This topic is important because whatever the objective of any negotiation, it's difficult enough to achieve even when it takes place among people of similar backgrounds. The challenge becomes even more complex when we deal with other cultures, whether it's Australia or whether we cross national boundaries, because of the difference in cultural values, lifestyles and expectations. This lecture will cover negotiation, the challenges to negotiation, understanding yourself in negotiations, knowing where to negotiate, and effective strategies for global negotiation. Negotiation is fundamental to human communication and interaction. As human beings, we negotiate all the time with our spouses, children, friends, bosses, customers, bankers, a whole range of people. It's an integral part of our everyday lives, and for most part it has become a largely unconscious process. If we recall Ferraro's definition of culture as everything people have, think and do as members of a society, as so many other aspects of our life and our behaviour, the way we negotiate is influenced by and framed by our cultural assumptions, how we see negotiation, how we think about negotiation, and how we conduct negotiation. Negotiation basically is a process of bargaining between two or more parties to some kind of problem, deal or disagreement. Ideally, the goal should be to reach a mutually accepted solution or win-win, one that benefits everybody as much as possible. This is known as a cooperative view of negotiation, a collaborative or integrative approach. Most successful negotiators start off with a win-win aim. Strategic planning and decision-making is key as both parties work together to create value or to satisfy both their own and the other's needs. This approach is important because if we want to and we need to maintain an ongoing relationship with other parties, we need to think about our long-term relationships rather than short-term. While the overall goal may be to arrive at a solution acceptable to all parties, some cultures view the optimum outcome of the negotiation quite differently. In some cultures, compromise, where each gains some and each lose some, is assumed proper. This is known as a distributive approach, which assumes that neither side needs all of what is being asked. Furthermore, for some, it can be viewed as a competitive activity, where the goal is to win at the expense of others. One party gets everything by defeating the other. This is also distributive to some extent, but each party assumes it's essential to achieve all of its own demands and to deny all the others' demands. There are challenges, cultural challenges to negotiation. Whatever the objective of the negotiation, it's difficult enough to achieve even when it takes place among people of similar backgrounds. The challenge becomes even more complex in international negotiations because of differences in cultural values, lifestyles and expectations, differences in power distance, uncertainty avoidance, time orientation, masculine-feminine cultures, high and low context communication, and differences in being and doing cultures. The dissimilar verbal and non-verbal languages also have different approaches to formal procedures and problem solving, such as in high context and low context communications. As mentioned previously, international negotiations are even more challenging because of the number and variety of stakeholders, such as how much influence does government have. They can have varying influences depending on whether they're Eastern or communist countries as compared to Western countries. Not all challenges are cultural, though. Working within confines of two different and sometimes conflicting legal structures can also be a challenge. Unless negotiating parties can both understand and cope with the differing sets of laws, policies and political authorities that are very important to understand, particularly in international joint ventures. The extent in which government bureaucracies exert their influence on the negotiation can be a problem. Different currency systems can vary in relative value because of the course of a contractual period and therefore can make whether the differences in how people negotiate. And sudden changes in governments, the enactment of new legislation, wars and internal revolutions are also important. Even natural disasters can disrupt international business negotiations either temporarily or permanently. Understanding ourselves is really important. This unit obviously focuses on cross-cultural awareness and understanding how we view others, the similarities and the differences. But we also need to understand and recognise the need for negotiation training. How much experience do we have as a negotiator, and where can we find someone to mentor us to learn how to negotiate? And also to recognise the need that we may also need to have cross-cultural training as well. Where to negotiate can also be an issue. Both sides have a stake in the outcome of negotiation, and therefore the place of negotiation can be on the home ground of either party or a neutral environment. Selection of a site for the negotiations is of critical importance because there are a number of advantages for negotiating in your home turf. Getting used to differences in languages, food, pace of life and other aspects of culture can also be important, particularly for someone who's new to negotiating and also new to travelling around the globe. Even a well-prepared negotiator will make a relatively smooth and quick adjustment, yet they will still have some times of discomfort and awkwardness, and that can be particularly as a result of jet lag. Sometimes we have little or no control over the room setting, the size of the conference room, the seating arrangements and the scheduling of times for both negotiating and socialising are decisions made by the host country negotiating team. Therefore, the side that controls these various details of the process can use them to their own advantage. Clearly, those negotiating at home have a marked advantage over the travelling negotiator due to all the other reasons above. But also, it's also easier to get questions answered by colleagues rather than relying on technology. There are effective strategies that can help any negotiator. Having cultural intelligence, knowledge, awareness and sensitivity to others is very important. Being aware of relationship rather than task. Some cultures, such as Japanese cultures and Chinese cultures, want to know if they can build a long-term relationship, and they see honesty, trust and integrity as all very important. Having an understanding of the difference between the position and the needs of the negotiating parties is also something that negotiators can learn. One may have a better position going into the negotiation, but if you consider the underlying need of the other party, you can bargain for a better outcome, one that satisfies both of you. Try and convert win-lose positions where one side's happy and the other not, to win-win of both parties, to be happy with the situation. This opens up the possibility of trust and integrity for future deals, and that's really what organisations need to think about. We need to think about, as we recall and emphasise the caution that through this semester we've been learning a lot of cultural value orientations and frameworks, but we also need to understand these as generalisations rather than specifics. The notion of time is relatively important as far as negotiation, particularly in the overall scheme of life and regarded differently by culture. Be sensitive to timing. Don't conduct business on public or national holidays or religious days. Try and be flexible. Have your plans, but be contingent about it. Cross-cultural negotiators' best laid plans can often go astray. Schedules can get changed, government bureaucrats can be unpredictable or cause delays. Your ability to readjust quickly and efficiently does not demonstrate weakness. On the contrary, it denotes resilience. Your capability of responding to changing situations can be seen as a real positive in negotiation. Much of the preparation needs to be undertaken weeks and months before the negotiation. Information needs to be gathered about the parties you're negotiating with, the legal confinements, the government, as well as about how negotiations are done in that culture. At the negotiation table, it's important to listen to what the other party's saying. Listen closely about try and understand their difference between their position they're taking and what they need out of the negotiation. The notion of in-group and out-group is very significant in some cultures. In the beginning, you may require a middle person, someone who knows both parties, to make a representation on your part. But over time, as you become, and it may be years, you come to know the other party and they have experience of you and building a strong relationship, there may be less and less need for that middle person. Creating and building lasting long-term relationships with global business partners are founded in fundamentally based on honesty, integrity, and trust. Trust develops only when people act ethically and with integrity, which means being honest with oneself and with others, keeping promises, accepting responsibility for one's actions, and not violating the ethical standards of one's own culture or that of your global partner. When using an interpreter, it's important for that person have both intimate knowledge of both the languages, and if technical expertise is needed, they also need to have that. The interpreter involves putting an additional person between the two primary negotiators, and therefore they must need to be effectively interpret your message as a sender to the other who's the receiver, and also interpret the receiver's message back to you. In summary, the ability to negotiate successfully is essential in all business. International managers need to prepare for cultural variables that influence negotiations, including the relative emphasis on task versus interpersonal relationship, and the use for general principles versus specific details, the number of people present and the extent of their influence. Formal negotiation typically progresses through stages of preparation, relationship building, exchange of task-related information, persuasion, and concession and agreement. The process of building trusting relationships is a prerequisite to doing business in many parts of the world. Make sure that you always try and aim for win-win solutions, therefore everybody will be satisfied. And also make sure that you understand that integrity, honesty, and trust are especially crucial to some cultures. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the DVD and the questions that we have for you.